Hey there, it's your host, Mara Glatzel, and you are listening to Even Here, Even Now, a podcast where we are devoted to sharing frank conversations and true stories about what it means to stay by your own side and meet your needs consistently, messily, and sustainably. Now, on to today's show. For those of you who have been around here for a couple of years, you know that talking about burnout is one of my favorite topics. And the reason is that many of my clients come to me burnt out. Many of my friends come to me burnt out. Burnout is in the room with us all of the time in 2026. You know, I've noticed, having done this work for 15 years, there was a significant turning point at the beginning of the COVID pandemic where people who hadn't experienced burnout before certainly have in the time since then. And I want to start with that. I want to start with what burnout actually is, because I don't know, the way it's talked about, I find it can be shaming, it can feel bad, it can feel like you did something wrong. And when I'm teaching about burnout, what I'm frankly talking about is the overextension of your personal resources. It's like you poured out more energy than you had. And, you know, this is something that happens. We can pour out more energy than we have for a period of time. This is useful in a state of emergency or when we need to rise to an emergent occasion, but it is not meant to be a life strategy. And yet for so many of us, we're pouring out. That becomes the new baseline. Pouring out. That becomes the new baseline. And so even when we're rising to an occasion, we're very rarely pausing, pulling back, and realizing like, okay, I was able to do that for a period of time. The situation warranted, and now I need to recuperate my energy, because burnout is exactly that. You expanded and then you must contract. What goes up comes down. It's energy math, right? It's like the literal energy that you have. You used it all. And then some, and now you are tired. And if you do not pause to rest, to tend to yourself, you will only become increasingly tired. But here's the problem. When we are experiencing burnout symptoms, we hyper-personalize them. It feels scary. It feels like my body's sabotaging me. My body's, tattling on me. My body is showing to other people something that I did not give it permission to show. So oldest daughters, responsible ones, all of us to the front, like, tell me what we don't want. And that is to be caught in the act of falling down on the job. That is, we have a whole internal orientation around being hyper competent and being seen and known as such. So when we start getting burnt out, what happens is, the scary thing is happening. The foundation upon which I have built my life is shaky, is crumbling. And I don't want people to perceive me as weak. I don't want people to perceive me as not good enough. I don't want people to perceive me as unworthy. And so when I experience these symptoms, I orient, instead of turning towards myself and turn towards my own care and noticing them as symptoms of, this overextension of my natural energy resources, I don't like it. I get scared. It feels like what I should do is work even harder to cover it up, right? Work even harder to keep everyone from seeing me as I am, to micromanage their perception of me as hyper competent, as worthy, as good, as enough. And what happens then? Of course, we become more burnt out, because we were already low in energy reserves. Our body was telling us that. Our feelings were telling us that. Our internal experience was telling us that. But we didn't want that to be true, or we didn't think that should be true. And we certainly didn't want anyone else to see that in us. And so instead of turning towards ourselves, instead of turning towards our care, we have now doubled down and we have started pouring out yet even more energy that we do not have. And the end result is deeper burnout than we were experiencing before we got into this loop. But the loop does, it's a cycle, right? and on and on and on. This is why many of us end up in a place of being so low, surpassing the bottom of our energy reserves and getting to that critical point where our burnout isn't just I'm a little tired, but our burnout is I'm experiencing medical issues. I am experiencing mental health issues. I am experiencing the types of things that cause my life to come to a grinding halt. And if you have ever been in a state of burnout like this, you'll know it's really unpleasant. I have experienced burnout like this, burnout that I ignored the symptoms. I kept working. I worked harder only to find myself at a point where my body said, you're no longer in charge of making the decisions. I'm going to make the decisions for you. And it didn't feel good. It felt scary. It felt uncertain. I didn't know when my body would kind of come back together again. I didn't know how much care it would take. I felt like I was disappointing everyone. I couldn't do anything that I normally did. And it was a big rupture in my life that I do not want to experience again. So what am I talking about when I'm talking about burnout symptoms? I am talking about things like snapping at your kids, panicking in the face of small tasks, having so much to do but not being able to start, turning towards tons of sugar and caffeine I'm not into demonizing any food group, but I do notice that many of us turn towards these things to kind of like prop us up energetically and keep us going when we are exhausted. Doom scrolling and more doom scrolling, resenting everyone and everything around us, feeling panicked, feelings of self-loathing, emotional fragility, these things that are naturally occurring in us when we are exhausted, when we have been carrying too much for too long without a break, when we have been going through a huge change or a huge life transition or a huge grief portal. And everything, it's like maybe you have a hard time eating. Maybe you want to eat everything in sight. Maybe you have a hard time sleeping. Maybe you're sleeping all of the time. Each of us experiences our burnout symptoms differently, but part of my work is to help people figure out what are my flavors of burnout symptoms? What are my tells? What are the things that happen in my body, in my emotional field, in my relational field? That's an indicator for me, like, hey, girl, you need something. You need some support. You need to slow down. You need to rest. You need to feed yourself. You need maybe some additional supports beyond that to get back into alignment because you have overextended yourself for too long. And I think what is tricky about this is that many of the things that are symptoms that I've just raised can feel like, oh, that's a personal problem. That's a me thing. That's a thing I should fix. That's a thing I should get help with. That's a thing I should optimize, right? If only I had a better plan, a better system, a better, like morning routine, all of these things, then I wouldn't feel so X. And then that system, that plan, that morning routine becomes yet another thing on the list and cue the burnout. Which isn't to say that we don't need support when we're burnt out. Of course we do. But, for me, it really begins with understanding I am a human being and not a robot. And what I'm noticing in myself, right, that awareness that I'm having about myself is, oh, some of my burnout symptoms are happening. So when I work with people, and this is something that we will be doing in WET if you're going to join me at the end of the month for my weekend bonanza slumber party extravaganza, one of the things that we are going to be doing in WET is really going through a process of mapping what our individual burnout symptoms are from a scale of 0, like cup full, feeling great, to 10. 10 being like full tilt, burnout, really difficult personal experience of life at that juncture. And I'm going to teach you how, as we start to plot the symptoms that we experience from that kind of low level and as they build, how we can use this as a tool. We talked last week about the daily check-in, how we can use this burnout scale as a tool to not only be in relationship with ourselves, but also tend to ourselves and make plans on our behalf. And so this is a really useful, I've been doing this practice with my clients for a decade. And it's one that I really like because it's hyper tangible. And I think part of what it helps us to understand is this feeling of, this isn't something bad and wrong about me. This isn't something I need to be ashamed of. It makes perfect sense that I'm burnt out given all of the many things that I'm carrying. And these things that I'm experiencing, picking fights with my partner, opening the refrigerator and not remembering what I opened it for, and having so many things to do, but not being able to do any of them, or doing all of the things that are not the things that I actually have to do, but feeling like I did so many things and now I'm too exhausted to do the things that I have to do, right? All of these many different symptoms of how that burnout might show up. And what's important to acknowledge is, depending on your neurotype, depending on your personality type, depending on your attachment style, these symptoms are going to look different for you, right? If you are neurodivergent, you're going to have some of these things that are maybe on somebody else's spectrum. That's your baseline. Like that's how your brain works on a relatively low burnout day. For somebody else, it might be the exact opposite. And so this is why it makes so much sense. And it's so good to do this work in a hyper individual way, so that you can have a working understanding of, oh, wow, I think I've talked about this on the podcast before, but I have a lot of auditory tells that are examples of is like a prominent burnout symptom. When the presence of noise like trips me directly into anger, that's like a pretty solid sign for me. But forgetfulness. But the other thing that it is a sign that I pause and pay close attention to, is when I'm getting burnt out, I have this feeling, if I put my hair up into an elastic, it's like I can feel the elastic on my hair follicles. That is how sensitive I am in that moment. And that hypersensitivity is how I find myself in a mid-range point. So for me, on this scale, it would be kind of a 5, right? But as we get deeper on the scale, what's so important about having this written down so that you can use it, as we get deeper into the scale and we get more burnt out, the walls kind of close in. And I notice for myself that if I get past a 7 or an 8, I'm no longer believing I deserve the care that I need. And so it's really important for me to have a well-developed understanding of what this looks like, because otherwise, once I get to that 7, 8 point, I start really having an incredible amount of self-doubt, an incredible amount of self-loathing, an internal experience where I'm aching for support that I don't think I deserve, which becomes a kind of feedback loop unto itself. And so when we have an understanding of these different symptoms as symptoms, and not, big, huge glowing signs that I'm a failure as a human being and a mother and a business owner and everything's wrong about me. When I partner that with this understanding of like, burnout's in the room with us. It's not an if, it's a when. I like to consider myself as always kind of in this dance with burnout. Because what I notice as a human being in 2026 is it is available to me always if I am not attentive to myself. If I'm not always looking at my allocation of my precious resources, my time, my energy, and my attention from a space of not wanting to be burnt out or wanting to be as little burnt out as possible. Now, what I think is really important to acknowledge here is that it's not just the doing of things that burns us out. It's also being with things that burns us out. So, you may think like, oh, well, I barely did anything today. But if the things that you did are things that are inherently stressful for you in particular, they're going to have a higher energetic price tag than they might for somebody else. So for example, for somebody who has medical trauma or who really struggles to make phone calls, making a phone call to a doctor might be something that you've put off for months. And so the actual doing of the thing is going to have a higher energy cost. You're going to have to pour more out of your little energy pitcher to do that thing than somebody who doesn't have medical trauma, who doesn't struggle to make phone calls, has the executive functioning to be able to do that. And so your two experiences of doing the exact same thing are going to have a different energetic cost. Now, in addition to that, right, being a person in the world who is interfacing with national politics here in the States, geopolitics around the country and around the world, the climate crisis, of course, the multitude of wars and genocides that we are streaming through our phones on a daily basis, in addition to both macro and micro experiences of homophobia, transphobia, racism, fat phobia, ageism, and so on and so on and so on. Right? If we think about how the things maybe we can consider, like the things that we do, it's like we're pouring energy out, pouring energy out, pouring energy out. When we are experiencing the micro, the everyday in my life, and the macro, like I read about a thing which impacted me personally, kind of by proxy, that's like those drops of water are being sucked out of that little vessel by a straw. So even if you haven't used that energy specifically, interfacing with the overculture, with colonialism, with white supremacy, with patriarchy, with capitalism, with the exploitative and extractive nature of the overculture, that will also draw energy from you daily. And it might not be as overt, it might not be as noticeable, but if we are going to have a really generous and loving understanding of our burnout, of the overextension of our resources, it is imperative that we have an understanding that it's not just what we do each day. It is also what we encounter, what we absorb, what we survive each day that impacts our energetic capacity. And so when we are considering it from this perspective, it enables us to see, like, I'm just one person. And I am navigating so much. And for so many of us, I am doing that without or with very little care and consideration on a daily basis. The expectation of the overculture is not only can you do it, but you can do it well. And if you don't, it's a you problem. You are the problem to be fixed. And here are a multitude of fixes that you can buy, right? Things that will kind of like put a shiny face on it, self-care products, all of these sorts of things. And when I work with people, even though I'm a coach, I offer retreats and workshops and courses for humans who are burnt out. This kind of work is really different. This is really like a teach a person to fish sort of situation. Then they're going to fish for life. Because the truth is, when we start to have this understanding of our burnout, of these symptoms, we have a structure that we can utilize over and over and over again. Because you better believe I'm paying attention for my tells all the time. Yesterday I was spending time with my kids on the beach. It was my sister's birthday party, and I hadn't slept very well the night before or several nights prior to that. And I encountered a burnout symptom that I have not experienced in a long time. And that was forgetfulness. I was like, what did you say? What did you want? I went to the grocery store. What am I doing here? What do I need? Every single step, if I didn't scaffold it with like asking for help or writing a note or, making sure that I remembered what I was doing from point A to point B, I would not remember. And that's a sign, right? That's not a problem I mean, it was problematic, but it's a sign from my body like, hey, Mara, you got to slow down. And what's true here that I think is also often overlooked is that excitement and doing good, fun things requires energy too. So sometimes we think like, oh, I'm burnt out because I've been dealing with all of these really shitty things. And sure, that's true. But I am here to tell you, you can just as easily get burnt out with a schedule chock full of exciting and awesome engagements that you're totally stoked about. This is kind of like the August problem. I find that especially around here, I live in a seasonal community. It is really quiet most of the year. August is like gangbusters. Like there are a billion things to do every single day. It's bright, it's hot. There's so much going on. There's more that you could say yes to than any one person can say yes to in any given day. And they're good things. They're fun things. They're things you might want to do. But you can get burnt out on fun just as much as you can get burnt out on stress, right? Because that kind of peak of excitement is very similar to a peak energetically and internally to a peak of stress. So having this understanding of these are symptoms, these are messages that my body is sending me. My body's not tattling on me. My body's not sabotaging me. It is calling me home to myself, right? We've been talking a lot here because I love a metaphor and because we're getting ready for wet. I'm talking a lot about droughts and water and gardens. And, you know, everything drying up to a crisp in my garden isn't a judgment of the garden, isn't a failure of the garden. It is a fact of a lack of moisture. And so too, burnout is a fact in the face of a lack of care. And, you know, I just want to pause here and say, this insidious message that we can and should go without care, that somebody else out there can and should go without care, that like being able to do it all and, you know, being high vibe 24/7, 365 days a year is like the gold standard that we're all aiming for. If we want to be well, we really have to start divesting from that kind of messaging. It is rich. It is rampant. But if you want to be well, it is so important that you understand, first of all, each and every one of us has a different capacity. So you could line up 10 people in a room and each and every one of them is going to have a different capacity. They're going to operate optimally under a different set of circumstances. They are going to have different sorts of energetic price tags for different things, right? Like this is why my work is always like a scaffolding for you to fill in for yourself, because there is no one size fits all when it comes to effectively tending to your burnout and staving off future burnout. Because you cannot work your way to deserving care. You cannot become better and then all of a sudden that care, you know, is handed to you on a silver platter. Your worth is inherent and you require care right in this moment. We all do to varying degrees. And so we really can't compare ourselves to other people. We can't compare our capacities to other people's capacity. This work, the work of coming alive and staying alive, has to do with taking radical self-responsibility for the body, the life, the nervous system, this ecosystem that each and every one of us has to tend, right? The tender stewardship of your own ecosystem must begin and end with you. It must begin and end with you. This is why that prescriptive self-care, that care that we are sold, the like do 10 things and you're not going to be burnt out anymore. You know, you're checking them off and you're wondering why it's not working. And then you want to just like throw the whole thing in the trash because, well, you used your like tiny sliver of energy on that thing and it didn't work. So like, fuck that whole concept of self-care anyway. we have got to return home to ourselves. We have got to begin to understand what are the messages that my body is sending me. What is my body trying to tell me about what I need? Because when you know the answer to those questions, when you are brave enough to listen, and when you are willing to divest from this idea of the presence of my burnout, the presence of my needs, the presence of my imperfection means there's something bad about me, something I should cover up by working even harder, you will never be able to break out of that cycle of burnout. And I want you to break out of that cycle. I want us all to break out of that cycle. I want us all to really buy in to this understanding of like, wow, my body's trying to tell me something. And how much different would my life be if I were willing to listen to it? And I know as well as anyone that there's a lot that's wrapped up in that. That is so much easier said and done, but it can be practiced. And all of my communities are places where you can practice that. We are practicing that right now on this podcast by having this conversation. So I'm glad that you're here. And I hope at the end of this episode, you have an expanded, a thickened narrative about your own burnout so you can stop blaming yourself and start turning toward yourself. If you want to develop a trustworthy relationship with yourself, where your needs are not up for debate, they're not constantly being litigated, where the symptoms of your burnout are not seen as signs of your failure, your personal failure, right? Signs that you should work harder. This is the place for you because these are the conversations that we're having here. And the felt experience, the quality of your life depends on it. See? Thanks for listening to Even Here, Even Now with Mara Glatzel. If you want my support in learning to stay by your own side and nourish your needs, dance on over to maraglatzel.com/quiz to take my quiz to figure out what you need right now and receive my best tools for how to meet those needs with a greater sense of ease and confidence. If you love today's show, please leave us a rating or review wherever you subscribe to this podcast. It helps more than you know. And as always, permission loves company. If there's a human in your life that you think can benefit from this conversation, I would be so grateful if you shared it with them. Thank you. See you next time.